like,
Certainly.
I didn't even exist anymore. It was like,
Yeah, that's typical diamond.
or even like I can fit a tree.
Yeah.
And be totally fit.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I can't tell you how much erections I become just by nature. Yeah. Yeah. Normal.
And I can feel a tree respond.
Of course. That's, whatever.
But what shamanistic, when you say shamanistic techniques, can you give me?
I have no idea. But you know them all. You just have to allow yourself that your body shows it. You know, just get yourself in the environment, walk like for 3-4 hours, just, you know, that your mind shuts up. And then stand there and let nature do it. Pardon me?
Is your mind ever shut up?
After long walks, yeah. You know, and then a little bit masturbation, or first, like, you know, just having a body and then masturbation, da-da-da, you know.
If Sarah is inherently a shaman, then maybe you have been a shaman before.
Of course.
And that is why maybe also your body has been molested, because during the initiation of a shaman, they dismember their bodies, so they cut themselves and so on, so they do tremendous trauma to their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And some shamans don't make it, really. They stop, it hurts too much, so they detach from it.
Yeah.
And, I don't know.
The non...
Some of the history behind
Yeah, sure.
what's going on now.
Yep. I still want to go to the happy 12th house, because I want to then make the loop what she is projecting onto the world on the 7th house thing.
The ultimate truth, the healing.
No, we are here. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. I want to hear something about Taurus combined with 12th house, combined with the Venus in Sagittarius in the 6th house.
The healing of the senses.
The healing of the senses, yes?
You think somebody else could do that?
Yes, that's the projection part. What is she longing for? Taurus.
To be self-reliant.
What else?
Security. All those self-reliant.
What? Yeah?
Calming of the nerves.
Assurance.
Value.
You're talking about like a relationship.
Yeah, right now we want to define what her ultimate longings are, that she can find within herself through the contact to the inner divine. But because of our society, how we then project that longing subconsciously onto our partners or the contact on other people.
Survival.
Survival.
Well, I knew it was an S word.
Well, Jeffrey's list of archetypes to Taurus is only S words.
I know.
Self-reliant, self-stable, you know, so it was one of them, yeah. Survival. She wants to have her survival be on a central physical level, be guaranteed. You know?
But she wants God to give her lots of money.
Not necessarily. No.
Towards money.
Because I see her in a constant state of life struggling. Constant state of life struggling. As if fighting for the permission to finally be alive. You know? Here with the Taurus, she's looking for the survival, to be allowed to live. Yeah? Found via the senses, via embracing the longing, the truth within it, you know, and to offer it the divine and live it via practice with the divine. First. Hold on. No, it has nothing to do with nature right now. It has everything to do with her own survival and her own physical nature. That went even to the point that the belief systems and the circumstances being created attracted so much crap. No? That she still believes I need to suffer to deserve life. No? No God wants that. And exactly that desire, that ultimate longing, becomes subconsciously projected on others with sexuality. Yeah? Got it? More important is that she got it.
That means the projection means that she feels or thinks that she needs others to survive, or how should I?
She hopes that there's someone who helps her guarantee to survive
Okay.
out there.
Validate her existence, validate her reason for survival. She looking for else to validate.
Be a census who validates, who, gives her life force and everything. But the deepest longing is to get survival. And therefore it could be that she's projecting on people that have a very strong survival instinct. Yeah? Those kind of little warriors that go into the desert in the morning and eat snakes and da-da-da-da-da. Yeah? Then I project my own need. Got it? Yeah? Yeah?
So by herself, she doesn't feel she can survive, is that by
There's-
herself?
Let's look into this chart.
Yeah. She can't survive.
No, she thinks, because the incredible emotional pain and physical, she has a constant feeling that life is threatened, that she is that life is in danger. Of course it was.
Could it be that maybe there's even a deeper meaning too? I mean, that Venus ruler is in Sag in the 6th house, so it's really wanting to know the truth about survival, and then ultimately that the truth about survival is it doesn't matter what happens to your body. That you can go through incarnation after incarnation dying, and it's going to happen.
Yeah, but see, I would not go there with a client like Lara, because her, number one, she has a Taurus in the 12th house. Yeah? So maybe it's more like to embrace and appreciate the physical survival first, to then learn the lesson that it's only, a little game of light. You know what I mean?
To own it first.
Yeah.
Own it.
Yeah.
Take it first. I deserve life.
Yes.
Yeah, because you can't appreciate that until you actually do feel safe. Because when you feel like you're in danger, you
Yep.
can't embrace those higher philosophies.
To me, they're bullshit then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when I'm in a state of traumatized, of emotional wounds. Yeah? I mean, to be honest, how often do you have a craving to just be held when you're by yourself walking around the streets? All the time. And now we tell her, you know what, this is bullshit, you don't need to be held. Just learn that, life is much, you know what I mean?
A guy that I was having problems with actually said to me once, and he's like I think, going into first stage spiritual, and he's always running around with a new thing and a new thing. And he told me, he said, just embrace the life. I was so fucking angry.
Yeah. 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 But, ultimately it might be right, but,
But, I mean, the way
there's a need first that needs to be met, and it needs to be healed. Have you seen Neptune coming up to your Jupiter? Huh? Sorry. No, David is not satisfied yet. Yes, it could be right, but I see the ruler of her 2nd house, David, in her 1st house, which is physical body.
Right.
Yeah?
I completely agree with you, and I wouldn't give that advice in counseling unless I really knew the person and I really knew they were looking for that type of answer.
Yeah.
However, the understand more at an ego level.
Here, with her, it's an essential level in Clara's case. Essential. Not egocentric, essential.
But also, for me, the
Essential survival. Yeah?
The light for me
Yeah.
is kind of the process that it becomes through the survival, through the body.
Yeah, exactly. That's pure shamanism. To bring the great spirits onto earth, to transform it, or call it whatever you want, to bless it, yeah? To make unity between manifested creation and source of creation. All shamans bring it down, not flee away from.
And then when you...
That's patriarchal bullshit. I'm not looking at you.
I feel that when I perform my poetry, when I'm totally not thinking, just performing, comes down, it gives out, and then it goes back up, and in those moments, then when I'm totally whole, then if I die tomorrow when I feel like that, I don't care.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the whole thing. See, we're talking about dying right now. So we're talking about survival here. Yeah?
I always have this, but also with the work thing, I always have this fear that that I have so much to heal, and I won't be able to get
Sweetie.
to do my work.
Sweetie, that is your Venus in the 6th house. This happy list being always confused to have this big sword over your head. You're never good enough. Yeah? Give yourself a break, please. Yeah? Venus polarity in the in the 12th house. Give yourself a break. You know what I mean? Peace first. Not work first. Peace first. Inner peace first. Then you see that some things that you think has to be done are fucking unimportant. They're only coming out of the Virgo department. Yeah? Got it? Yeah. But the inner side of Venus can only be embraced with its polarity of the natal Venus, which is again in the 12th house. Yeah?
So you're saying...
It's very similar like praying. You have two hands and you bring them together to unity. And then afterwards you can work better. Yeah?
It's also another way of integrating your animal nature with your human nature, and just to have a power animal.
Yeah.
One or more power animal.
Yeah.
You can go to a workshop,
And
it's fun.
Yeah.
It's great fun.
Or just, ask God to show you what your animal is. You know?
When I was talking about the stuff with Jeffrey about the peyote, I also was talking about a dream I had once, that I dreamt that I was a bear, and I was by this fallen log, and all of a sudden I stepped out of the bear. I was a Native American. I stepped out, and I asked him, I was a and I said, I don't know if that's a past life, and he said, no. He said, that's just in that kind of shamanistic way, what you need at the time, you become.
That's, by the way, a technique that I would recommend that you should try to practice. You see, I'm her 7th house, right? That's the reason why I say I try to practice. Because I'm her Jupiter right now in Aquarius. Yeah? I could even go in some clients' cases, I do the opposite. I describe in something and they go like, you know what, that's not good for you. That triggers out the paradox in Aquarius. They go like, it's not good for me, then I do it. Sure, you need sometimes to trap people, to trigger like what you see that is a good, well, anyway.
I don't think you could do that, never mind. It's too hard for you or something like that.
No, sometimes, or to make like, that would be good to do, but you don't have to do it. Because the individual subconscious is always in a state of rebellion, always. When you say you have to, yeah? But if I say, would be good if you do it, but you don't have to do it, I take away the rebellious thought. And she goes like, that feels good, why not? Anyway, so that's Laya. Jeffrey taught you that.
No, he didn't, and I keep asking him, and he keeps forgetting and saying he'll do it later, but he's going to do it. So I'm bugging him every day. But yeah, this is what a strong drive towards.
Yeah.
Drive. I have to get it done, because I keep bugging him.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you're going to teach us Layote.
Well, go for it now. Because practicing Laya Yoga.
I'm trying.
Try harder. Try harder.
But make sure it's definitely class we all get to.
Yeah. Just tell him tomorrow morning, now it's time for Laya Yoga.
Okay.
Instead of a cigarette break or whatever.
Hey, if I could get them loaded in class, if you guys want to do, instead of a cigarette break tomorrow morning, want to do like cigarette break? Sure. Is that like a majority vote? Yeah.
I sleep in tomorrow, okay? I come like an hour later. So you deal with him.
What I thought we would do today is have,
You need your microphone.
Oh, yes.
what I thought we would do today is have a work day. And what I like to do is review any of the principles or dynamics, ideas that have been taught since this class began, and so we can start putting things together. So what I thought we would do is I would leave it up to you, and in terms of letting me know what things you want to review, work with, examples, whatever. Just to kind of bring everything together before we move on. So let me know what you want to review and talk about.
Give us a moment.
The moment?
A moment to think about it.
Okay.
I would like to talk about the Pluto polarity axis.
Naturally? Through natal chart polarity?
Yeah, like why is Pluto falling? Why is in the opposite side the axis, the mission, the relationship of the axis?
From a natal chart point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a good idea. What other ideas do we have?
Are progressions later this week?
Yeah, that's later.
Also, I don't know, this might be silly for this too, but when we were doing synastry at the end of last class, when something goes into one person, as opposed to the other way around, you get confused as to what
How to make those two fit?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Important, like how do you read it?
Okay, good. What else?
I couldn't find the nodes of Venus on my Starfire.
It's in the, you know that little box up in the upper left that says reports?
Yeah,
Click that on, and you'll see a menu come up.
yeah,
At the bottom of the menu, it says planetary nodes.
okay.
And you click that on. Just solar far.
Can we work a little bit with the planetary nodes today?
Yeah,
Sure.
that would be wonderful.
Individually, synastry, or both. Well, that'll be a full day.
Another question too, Jeff, is the planetary pairs. And for me, I like to be able to see things 2 ways or 3 ways so that I'm certain, you know what I mean? Astrologically, and working just with the planetary pairs. Blatantly use my own chart as an example. My moon and Saturn are in a trine. But yet my early childhood was really very, very difficult because there was a trine. So it's like for me, I can after the fact make that work. You know what I mean? But I want to be able to look at somebody's chart, and even though it's a trine, still get the right meaning from that. And in my mind, I know trine isn't always good, but yet there is a flow in there.
Well, in your context, that's why you want to understand it this way, because when you look in a total birth pattern, there can be, of course, signators, like in your case, that would symbolize being damaged as a child. But then when you this link with Moon, Saturn being trine, what does this now tell us? It's going to tell us that on a psychological, emotional level, you'd have more of an ability to integrate that damage, meaning having it not affect you as severely as it might be someone else. That's the value of looking at it that way. And you put the whole signature together.
So, in other words, it is necessary to go outside of that planetary pair to get a whole picture, and then say, well, how did as a child was this integrated, and how as an adult will it play out?
Exactly. Okay, any other ideas? Oh, we've got a full plate anyway, huh? What's that?
More examples of the synastry.
More examples in synastry.
That'd be really good.
Or like off the other side in like the second house, 12th house, 7th house, when interpreting that job.
So like putting 3 different signs up.
Right, well, yeah, when you're interpreting the second, 7th, if there's an interception.
Okay. Well, that was certainly a day's work. I thought it was going to be easy. Well, let's start with the simple stuff first. So we'll go little polarity stuff. So you just want to know about how it works through polarity?
Yeah. Yeah, I have a feeling of that it's like, I know I've heard, Yeah, why get the opposite side in the integration that there's the whole thing.
Now you see my brain. This is an astrologer. And I think what we'll do too, just to make this a little bit more lively, is show you how it operates through the different evolutionary conditions.
Oh, good.
As we illustrate the polarities. So pick any house or sign you want to put the Pluto.
11th house in Virgo.
Virgo. And let's develop some context. Let's develop right away an evolutionary state. Which state do you want to examine?
Individuated state.
Male or female?
Male.
Cultural context.
Asian.
Asian. Cool. Religious shit.
Huh?
Religious stuff.
Religious. Catholic.
In Asia?
I love it, Catholic in Thailand.
And economic condition.
Medium rare. No.
Does it move? Middle?
Middle upper.
Oh, upper middle.
Okay. So, before I say anything, does somebody fly out with thoughts? And this is now, of course, the root is the soul structure. And we notice it's an individuated state. Right there, if you see this combined with this, what kind of statement would you make? Alienation. Alienation.
Liberation.
What's the alienation based on? Being different. Then what?
Then the consensus in the Virgo. Virgo. Don't concentrate on crisis around at one time.
Well, how would you, what kind of statements could you make in terms of how this whole structure is actually defined?
By lack. Lack.
That's one. That could certainly be implicated. But why is the aloneness? What is the intent of creating, what would be the soul's intent by having Pluto in the 11th in such a way as to experience cultural aloneness, cultural alienation? What is the role of the soul structuring itself in such a way as to not even be on an inner basis integrated into the culture that it's in? Why is the soul structured to be in this observational state? In which the emotional structure is essentially devoid. What's the intent here?
Without the alienation, the soul can only evolve as quickly as the consensus evolves. And by separating from the consensus, it can evolve at its own natural rate. So that in order to move out, in order to proceed in evolution, it's a necessity at some point that they do break free from the consensus.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they'll go on for century after century after century, moving very, very slowly.
But many people have, who are in a consensus, have 11th house Pluto. You know, I mean, look at some of your U.S. presidents have 11th house Plutos.
Develop activity about So you can compare the difference? Like a social objectivity?
It is a social objectivity, because the intent is to expand consciousness beyond culture. So it can have more of a distinct sense of its true individuality. So there's a necessary need to expand consciousness through objectification, devoiding the consciousness of emotion. But it's relative to the individuated state, the answer becomes to remember, progressive remembrance about the nature of its individuality, through comparison and contrast, meaning, I'm not this, I don't think this, I don't value that. So, Pluto, what am I? So all souls with Pluto in the 11th, in Virgo, individuated state, no matter what culture, will come in with this necessary need to remember about their distinct individuality through comparison and contrast relative to what they're not. So what happens in the early life is this very fundamental detachment in which they can't really engage the body fully, particularly the emotional body, in order to learn, remember about themselves through counterpoints. You see it? And what this would then mean in Virgo is many lifetimes of experiencing a core inner existential void or aloneness. And that's essential because that's part of the continuing moving away from the consensus. But in the individuated state, they've not yet embraced a spiritual dimension. So this then creates an intensified Pluto, inner experience called an existential angst, or free-floating anxiety. And in this state, because where the center of gravity would be in consciousness, would be more in the subconscious plane. And the subconscious in all of us contains the larger blueprint of who we're meant to become. So in the early life, what this induces is a variety of thought that will initially manifest from right to left brain. Thoughts that show the soul or person a diversity of possibilities, all correlating with the actualization of its uniqueness. So in the early life, there will tend to be a lot of experimentation, trying on this role, trying on that, and it's a process of elimination there. Now, what's happening here, and for prior to the current life, there has been a Plutonian dependency, finding other small groupings of people of like mind in order to feel personally validated with respect to soul purpose. And there has then been a dependency on that. So one of the lessons, clarity, how to take total and full charge of its own dependency or its own reality in such a way as to become self-validating. You see, self-validating. You got it?
The self-validation.
Fifth house. And because of what we're talking about, you can now see the implied crises. Where do I fit in? Who's like me? Who do I make bonds with, to which I can feel validated because there's somebody at least like me? Within this is an implied fear of persecution, verbal, for being different. And remembering that 11th house is the origin of projection. So we can imagine that there has been several lifetimes in which the individuals attracted really heavy-duty persecution of a Virgo nature just by the fact of being different. Just to be like on a on a symbol, like on a picture level, it'd be like a bunch of yuppies sitting around a dumb cocktail party or a table, drinking a dumb martinis, and from stage left, somebody hurls a tarantula. All of a sudden, the yuppies freak out. This would be the tarantula, symbolically. Two different. And of course, it's different as judged against the consensus, threatens the consensus. And that then becomes the basis of the projection. So this individual will come into life, there's a series of lives prior, in which he has had the feeling of being utterly misunderstood by everybody, except the small groups that he would occasionally find of like mind, other alienated souls. And therein lies where the dependency would stand. And you can see all the crises around us. So it's now gotten in the habit of making crises, even out of crises out of thin air, in order not need to exist. The reason for the crisis is also to fill in this void. Because when a person creates crises, it's got the mental structure engaged because of crises. And that's a way of avoiding this, the inner aloneness. So what the Pisces message is, learning how to live without crises. Instead of focusing on problems, focusing on solutions, which then has the effect of making the apparent problem be pulled forward.
And that would be like through self-validation, because it's a big house that the union with Pisces to live without crisis through self-validation.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, does that also mean that they could get resolution through finding God, if they haven't been?
Not so much because we're in an individuated state. And there would have to be, as an astrologer, you would be recommending because of the evolutionary flow, but you're not going to be recommending, so to speak, strictly speaking, just spiritual book. You'd be much more in the area of psychological philosophies, like a good author for this character would be something like Krishnamurti. Freedom from the known, think on these things. Because you have the implication of psychology, but also now linked with a higher philosophy. Krishnamurti. Krishnamurti.
What's Zen or something like that could be too?
Zen?
Zen.
That'd be too formal for him. Because it's too, Zen's rigid. And this will be a rebellion against rigidity. So it has to be an individual thing that he finds, that he can incorporate on his own terms. And because he's in this condition, we look at the nature of the title on those books, Freedom from the Known. Think on these things, you or the world, and so on. And it would fit his nature perfectly because Krishnamurti, the very essence of his teaching, is to strip away all the bullshit. And all this artificial crap that's not necessary. That was his strength. His weakness was not replacing anything. What would be destroyed? Yeah. But, you know, that's a good book for him. Another good book, an author would be Alan Watts. And particularly a book called The Wisdom of Insecurity. In his nature, the wisdom of insecurity.
Would you say closely to the same of what you said if he had Virgo, doing Virgo in the 5th house with the polarity in Pisces in the 11th house?
Mm-hmm.
Would you say more or less the same with the shift of the houses?
Pluto was in Virgo here, and Pisces was here? No. You'd be saying the opposite things.
Huh?
You'd be saying opposite things.
Oh, okay.
You'd be saying things like, right prior to the current life, he's been trying to act out with the dominance of his will, trying to impose his will on society. Look at me, here I am. And the lesson becomes learning how to open up to a group context, what the group needs from it. Just the opposite. What if we change these very same symbols and make a consensus? What kind of statements would we make now if it's a consensus thing? Still place the same conditions.
maybe he feels inside that he is a bit different, but he's afraid of going forward in that inner call to be different from the rest.
It would, yeah, with the symbols in mind, it would typically link with in a consensus state. Still, there's still this impulse to do something unique.
Mm-hmm.
So a classic example in just that symbol would be developing entrepreneur approach to life, where it designs unique business, and then taking charge of his destiny that way. You see?
To be like a leader?
Litter.
No, L-I. Leader. Leader.
Litter.
Leader.
Litter.
L-I. Leader. Leader.
Leader. Bueno.
Like to be that in the consensus, in the entrepreneur business.
Yeah. And typically with Virgo Pisces, it probably would translate into, well, a common application would be, because it's a link with food, probably some sort of unique restaurant. And if you put it in the context of Asia, it'd probably be, the restaurant that was offering different cultural food, rather than just the food of the country. Because you see this interplay of internationality now.
Because it's
Because of Virgo?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. That's because Virgo has his inner empty nose.
Ah.
This person would be in the spiritual state?
If we put it in a spiritual state? That's interesting when you overlay it with this.
The Catholic?
Because that wouldn't fit anymore.
Well,
He might grow up in this particular situation,
yeah.
but he would then, in that state, rebel against it. Because the implication to find something universal.
Because of life?
Yeah. And in that combination, Pluto's going to require proof. Therefore, simple things like faith via Catholicism would not apply. It's going to have to offer specific methodologies, Virgo, specific technique, through which the individual Pluto proved to itself what's being referred to conceptually. The immediacy of inner experience will then displace his existing tendencies to doubt. That becomes a key here.
Doubt.
Yeah, and that's why it only can be replaced with that which is directly perceived, not just understood intellectually.
An experience. So by being the Pisces polarity, would it have to do with working through that doubt to get in contact with the divine?
Yes, of course. That would be the primary stumbling block. It would be a major obstacle. And then when you bring in this related archetype of the 11th of liberation, you can then see in this state now, the spiritual state, the soul has an incredibly intense desire to go about as fast as it possibly could. And that becomes one of the messages of Pisces. Only go to pace you can assimilate each state.
And how would you go about interpreting if you had planets in the Pisces?
And then you would say that polarity point's already been in operation. So you have to now interpret it differently, meaning this has already been approached prior to the current life.
And it's just being reinforced.
It's a continuation.
Or if there's planets in the 12th house. Or if there's planets in the 12th house too, so if you know anything like
Yeah, sure. You could see it that way.
Do you consider at all if there's an angle like the midheaven or the ascendant, see Pluto's polarity puts it right in a polarity point is conjunct the midheaven or conjunct the ascendant, would that also indicate that there's been movement in that area? No?
Because the current life zodiac is the current life structure of consciousness. There are certain houses do demonstrate things that have been developed before, like second house, for example.
Second house?
Sure. for what that does called pre-existing value associations. Is this helping by going through it in a simplistic way?
Conjunction the chirons there with that. He is a female from having children. He's opposing Pluto.
Yes, because these are in opposition. That could mean many different things, and this is where a case where you'd want to have a backup split of itself. It can mean via this relationship issue, because right away you have the pathology of masochism here. There's very deep implied guilt, the need to atone, creating the pathology of masochism, then only being able to attract one of two kinds of men. One type of man being an absolute emotional cripple, who is simultaneously narcissistic. And then finding himself always playing the role of psychologist, nurse, in the relationship. Also go ahead and put on white uniform, red cross, name tag, walk around the household with a little pen carried, picking up the shit all the time. Oh, I see. Next one with a hand grenade. Take care of this situation. Liberate, no. Sorry. So what happens in these scenarios is that, because essentially she's creating little boys to herself, and who have been highly emotionally damaged in their own lives. So she becomes the fix-it person, the savior. And even in the context of having children, because of the implied insecurity in the men, what would have happened in prior life, many things, but one dimension will be the kind of man that's in America called the barefoot and pregnant syndrome, always trying to keep the woman pregnant as a way of controlling, limiting. So she will have subconscious memories to this effect. She will also have subconscious memories of actually losing her life in childbirth, through bleeding to death.
He's carrying babies through not insemination, in vitro, the twins.
Why bleeding? Why did you say bleeding?
Look at the symbols. What do you see there? What you see here is because this woman would have a fundamental fear of loss, abandonment, betrayal. Typically when a woman is then getting ready to have birth, because of this fear, they create a restriction. But the baby's got to come through. So when the people are doing this, the baby's trying to come through, everything gets ripped apart, leading to death. And in other centuries, when a woman was having that problem, they really did not have the technology to intervene. So that's one whole other scenario. She's also had scenarios of being married to some idiot and having a man go off, and now raising baby herself. That's also a limitation. You see? So these all subconscious fear that impact on the current life because of the implied trauma. Do you see the implied trauma of all this? Well, first of all, she's got the first resolution is to change her inner relationship to herself. Meaning she has to learn how to, until she can change her inner relationship to herself, i.e. personal vibration and magnetism, she can't help but to attract differently. So she changes her own inner relationship to herself, vibration, magnetism shifts, and then she can attract differently. Because the underlying issue here is to remove, purge, this pathology of masochism. Until that pathology is removed, she can't attract different. So she has to essentially restructure the subconscious. And once that is done, changing vibration magnetism, then she can attract differently.
You change your vibration or magnetism. Thinking about what you were saying about the inner relationship to yourself, or that being the polarity of Venus. Would that be the first step, is like having that relationship with yourself, as described in conscious? You were saying yesterday Venus and Virgo in the 6th would be Venus and Pisces in the 12th, and that way you would want to have a relationship with yourself that was maybe blissful, where you accepted yourself for yourself.
It's not, well, when you make that kind of shift and change, it's, the way to do it, I think I've described it before, is you have the person sit down, pencil and paper, make a line down the center, and then write down every negative/wounded message which has been projected. The nature of these projections causing the guilt is what's called acquired guilt, based on other people's projections. So the person writes all those messages down, and many as they can remember. In the right column, writing down counteractive thought, but not just inventing thought, not just Pisces bullshit, but actual thought that confirms and validates their actual reality. In this case, this one would receive from men with many life the message, you're a piece of shit, for example, or you're this and you're that. What you would attract is men who have two natures. On the one hand, cycles of an I love you almost as adoring kind of bullshit. Next cycle of juice. And so what you have here is to write back herself to herself. To say the message she heard was, you're a piece of shit. The counteractive message would be, actually, this is this individual's projection. I'm actually a very giving, nurturing, and loving person. Directly affirming her own reality. So there has to be just as many of those counteractives. The next step is, like a cassette machine, blank tape. Know what the power of her own voice, putting these counteractives on the tape. And then the last and most vital step, which is a reflection of natural or shamanistic law. Just before she would go to sleep, she put this tape on low volume. She goes to sleep. And these counteractives begin to enter the right ear, begin to access subconscious as she sleeps, in such a way that the counteractives now begin to restructure subconscious relative to the counteractives. And in this case, in this particular case, with Pluto in the 11th, because one of the unique powers that God gives people, with Pluto in the 11th, is the capacity to generate a reality through thought, as long as that thought is believed in 100%. So in this particular case, you would also have recommend on the right column, writing down various affirmations of what you would want her life to become. And they can be just as detailed as you would want to make them. And then now she's listening to this tape at night, and that's got to be done consistently for 4 to 6 months. At that point, the subconscious is now radically relative to the counteractives, affirmation. She's now totally changed her inner vibration magnetism. Then she now attracts differently. You see? Because until she can be with a man who is already healed at the point of attraction, it is going to work. And that then presupposes the man who's already looked, Pluto Venus, looked deeply into himself, understands how and why he's put together, and most importantly, owns it. Owns it. Not projecting more bullshit on her. Owns it. And this then allows for her desire deep emotional communion in the relationship versus idle, stupid chit-chat, which both people are now processing co-equally. Not her just playing Florence Nightingale.
I just wanted to say something. I wanted to do the tape. You have to have that reading time.
Yeah.
I didn't do that.
Go ahead.
who said it?
Maureen.
But you have to get on the tape, have a lead-in time of, I don't know how many minutes.
35, 40 minutes.
35, 40 minutes, so you can go to sleep.
It's important to have the ego suspended through sleep so it can't resist the message.
I didn't put the leader in mind, but I call it the I do something like fight.
You've done this, right? She knows the reality of it.
Year and a half later.
You gotta start over.
You can actually, because I have the, when I do the lead-in time, I have a lot of aspects to Uranus. I actually click the tape. You know, once it's next. I woke up and I just went like this with the tape set. I heard it click, but I wasn't quite awake. Then I woke up in the early morning. I said, what? And I looked in the battery set, and I just
We do have our ways. What's that?
If there's just a lot of Aquarian influence or Uranus influence, the statement that you made about the sort of the 12th being a gift from God, being able to think for this reality and then create it. Is that true if there's a heavy Aquarian and Uranus influence, or is it just those who are most?
If you have a strong Uranian emphasis, yes. That can be seen in 4 planets in the 11th, maybe Uranus rising, maybe Uranus aspecting many, many planets.
Is this something that most everyone would benefit from if they were able to do it?
If you have a masochistic and emphasize masochistic pathology, absolutely. Absolutely.
And the reason for doing this would be changing the inner magnetism? Is that how?
To change your inner relationship. Masochists have intrinsically self-negative relations. Even if they hear something positive about themselves, it's like somebody's talking about somebody else.
Could it be a common time for people to feel this? Like when I was listening to him, I wake up feeling really depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Is that...
It's typical. Because what's coming out? The very shit that's made you feel shitty for buku life. That's part of the reassociation, getting something up and out. And
do nightmares function? Can nightmares function?
Nightmares?
Serve that same purpose?
Yes, absolutely.
Jeff, you just said if there are planets in the opposite house to Pluto, that shows that the person already had worked on the, what do you call it? How did this person work on their subject already?
She's gone through this repeatedly prior to the current life. She's already received the information of how to change it, but she's had adjustment in maintaining the pattern. In other words, it's a habit that still doesn't want, a soul that doesn't want to let go of the experiential crises and self-punishment. That's why the lead point, if you had this as a client, the lead point is talking right away about this masochism, and if she's wanting to change it. If the answer is yes, then you go ahead and help out. If the answer is no, you ask them to leave. That's the kind of shock she would need to hear.
I found that a lot of people that I've talked to about the tape that are in the same kind of masochistic pathology, that coming right out of the consensus, maybe first stage individuated, look at the idea of a tape of a, that, and they're really not enthused about, so that's the same kind of thought. Okay, never mind.
Right.
You can now go on your way.
The most common word in the masochistic vocabulary is this, but. But. Masochists can hear the very solution and but.
And what would be the most beneficial planet to have in the 5th house, if any, to support that change in the person to...
There's no such thing. Once you have an active desire to change it, doesn't matter what the fucking planet is.
Want to make a request for next lifetime, like.
Yeah, right.
Professor regarding sleep and dreaming, I listened to this case, I was here in March, but somebody asked a question about evil coming at night in their dreams. Since dreams have to do with the 12th house and Pisces and the Thomas of God, would sleep and dreams be the best place to do battle against evil or do battle against negative? Because you have that.
Can you tell me? Because I was talking to someone about that yesterday.
But it's, well, nightmares, you said nightmares are maybe private, and this idea of programming while you're sleeping, sleep has to do with Pisces and the greater divine, is that the most ideal place to handle negative and handle evil and handle...
It depends on the state of evolution. If the person was in an advanced spiritual state, the answer would be yes, because they'd have already remembered or learned a variety of, let's use the word techniques, to employ at a shamanistic level in the context of dreams. But it takes a very advanced soul to know how to do that, if you're not ready. So failing that case, failing that situation, it must be counteracted consciously and mentally in a awakened state. What you have is you need to strengthen the will. And as you strengthen it in a conscious sense over time, it will carry over to the sleep state. Another thing to try to do is to, when the person is actually getting ready to go to sleep, have the person light some sage in the room just prior to sleeping. This will tend to negate evil coming into the dream state.
I don't remember which book, but I remember one of Yogananda's books talks about if you sleep on the right side versus the left side, it'll make a difference in your dreams. And then if one, I don't remember which side, one side will bring nightmares, the other side won't.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, I'll find it in the book and put it out.
That's interesting. I'd like to check that out.
I wonder if that correlates to your body, because someone told me when you sleep on your right side, at least they said you start off sleeping that way because you drain all the toxins going into the body.
I don't know about these things. so are you finding this helpful? You want to do another example?
Question on this particular situation, when we were going through, let's say consensus, the same makeup, and because of that Pluto in the 11th house, that has that kind of individuated feeling. I mean, I'm thinking of someone that has that kind of signature where they're different from the masses. How do we differentiate between if they're in consensus or individuated?
You have to observe their life. Classic example that's illustrating what you're saying now is people like Clinton, 11th house Pluto. You can see that he's right on the edge of individuating. And given that he's got an 8th house moon making the square here, I mean, look what he has done economically. It's brilliant. It's the best economy in the history of the United States. And here you see with this 8th house moon making square here, that natural social inventor linked with economics. Do you see it? So that's what your question contains, is that uniqueness, even in the consensus state.
Well, what happens if it wasn't squaring, but you had an 8th house moon?
I'm sorry?
What if it wasn't squaring in Pluto? I mean, is it Pluto? Yeah. But you had an 8th house moon, how would that impact the start?
Just an 8th house moon by itself?
Well, with the Pluto in 11, opposing Venus,
It would tend to be, if you link with the economic issue, be left at a formulated level without application. When you actually make a specific aspect, it makes it happen.
And if he would have the moon in the 2nd house, it would be also the same force in the economic level?
No, then you're going to have more of an issue linked with personal economics. In the 8th house, you have the application of social economics.
And then if Pluto was in the fifth, with that moon in the eighth, that again would be more impersonal.
That'd be more personal.
More personal.
Trying to amass personal wealth. Glorify the ego. Look at my Mercedes. So. Try a different color. It's your call. Where do you want the Pluto? First house. Good sign. What are the conditions? Male, female? What culture? What level of illusion? Third stage individuating. About the religious stuff. Well, I mean, in terms of heavy-duty exposure, no exposure, left to her own devices.
Not so much.
What about economics?
Middle.
Middle up.
Lower middle.
Lower middle.
Usually lunges must be so much.
Okay. Now, who can see one of the core issues?
Relationship.
Go for it.
A soul that's for many lives been having distinguished who the individual is separate and different because of the individual state, knowing different from birth from most people, and through relationships to the contrast and comparison of finding their own special uniqueness. Natural longing. But discovering the importance of the balance within relationship as far as an equal basis, being integrated with relations on an equal basis.
Good. Very good.
This person would need a lot of freedom.
Hmm?
This person would need a lot of freedom because of Aries. And Pluto being in the first house, also in Aries house. Freedom to initiate and do have to learn also.
Exactly. And because this need to balance their need for a relationship versus developing their own life, it becomes paramount. So it's going to require a partner who has enough inner security, non-needy. So it's simply an Aryan attitude. I'm with you because I want to be with you. And this eliminates Pluto, the underlying fear of entrapment. Based on other people's need projections. What else can I say here? Would this be a soul that instinctually felt it had something special to accomplish? Is that not one of the reasons to have enough circumstantial independence in order to find out what that is? The way, anytime you see this in a birth chart, I don't care what signs you see here, what you always call it is an emphasized emotional paradox linked with relationship. That's also true when you see south node in the first, north node in the seventh. A natural emotional paradox. The emotional paradox comes to the square to the Cancer. On the one side of the paradox, of course, is a cyclic need for almost absolute independence, but just as strong a need, cyclically, for relationship. That's why it's called an emotional paradox. And these desires, of course, go in absolutely the opposite direction. What almost all souls do unconsciously that have this pattern is they select partners that only reflect or embody some of their core needs and not all, which is an unconscious way of guaranteeing an exit point. Either they do the exiting or they get left. Most of the time they do the leaving. And that's to guarantee an exit point, freedom. So one of the lessons is, obviously, to unite the emotional paradox. Then the question becomes how to do it. And the answer is to identify, the person must identify all of their core needs, all of their essential needs, and then making a relationship choice in that knowledge. The person either embraces it or embodies it at the point of attraction, or they don't. Now it's something to work towards. It's either in place or it isn't. Pluto. Either or. And only then will the relationship be successful.
This is the first house. They wouldn't know what their relationship needs are. They would be in the process of discovering through trial and error, first house.
Yes, but as an astrologer, you can see what those needs are. And if you just list them out, you'll hear validation in every single one. And when you go, okay, and you wait for some person to come along that reflects all of this at the point of attraction. It's either there or it isn't.
So you go right to the second house and help them discover what their needs are?
Second, 12, 7, Venus, Mars, Mars-Venus phase, soul structures, evolutionary types, the core themes, and you put all that together.
Since this is third integrated state, isn't it somebody who already has learned how to take his freedom and go his own way?
Mm-hmm.
So the problem would rather be to be in a relationship than being free.
Okay.
The problem to him or her would rather be to be in a relationship than being on his own and being free.
That's the problem? The problem is to be in a relationship?
For her, yes.
Mm-hmm. More of a challenge, okay?
It's more of a challenge to be in a relationship than being on his own and being free.
Right. Exactly.
That's what I want to say.
Good.
Wouldn't that be indicated by Pluto in the first two?
Yes.
At that same point? Yeah. Jeffrey, you said something that this person would feel like they have a mission or they have a purpose. Where was it that you were seeing that?
First house Pluto.
Brand new phase, okay.
It's an Aries house, brand new cycle.
It's something special to us.
Something brand new, Aries.
Okay. Got it.
Something special.
Would this person be kind of at a limit where, they've had so much freedom for so many lifetimes that they absolutely need the reflection back from the partner, and that would be the need for moving to the seventh house?
That's the Libra orientation to the Pluto.
So would the goal here would be to learn how to relate as an equal partner, but yet lose the individuality?
Right. And that's where each partner has to be mutually independent. People have lives independent of relationship. You do not need to be together 24 hours a day. But if you come together cyclically and then become independent cyclically, come back to that.
Would another first house Pluto person? Would another first house Pluto person be good?
Boy, that'd be an interesting combination. It can work if the two people understand that their rhythms are different. As long as they can accept the rhythms being different, fine. And not making it some Pluto problem.
Is this where you would suggest the different separate rooms and then the room together?
That's a good idea.
How about linked houses? Yeah.
Link houses, yeah.
When I teach at the, I don't know if the Mexican painter,
Woody Allen and
I can't remember his name, Frida Kahlo? Dolly, that is his wife who lived in a castle. Tower. She wrote him notes to invite him over. Or 3 bedrooms. Yours, mine.
That's a good solution.
I have always thought, before I even met Jeffrey and talked and did astrology, after I divorced my ex-husband for South Dakota, I said, never again, I'm going to have my own space and we'll meet in the middle. That was like, so I validate that absolutely, that feeling of that need for independence is very strong.
So her Pluto's in Virgo, how does that change?
If the Pluto was in Virgo, she would sacrifice all these deep individual needs.
The masochistic pathology.
Or insert independent on another case, because Virgo can also have the application to sadism. Not masochistic.
No, right, I'm mixed.
So depending on the chart factors, it could be an absolute egocentric, narcissistic sadist who expected all things that revolve around him, whose anger levels are so fucking intense that via relationship he would leave every person as a form of hurting them before he himself could get hurt.
That was real writing.
There you go. So you know the type of...
Something about the Pluto in Sagittarius generation, maybe?
Oh, it's a great generation. I mean, my observation so far is, I would say about 30% of these souls are coming out of the womb really highly evolved.
Fast learners. Fast learners.
Extremely fast learners, because the center of gravity in their consciousness is right brain, Sag. So it's inherently intuitive, abstract, conceptual. Be able to see the parts within the whole versus just focusing on the part. The holistic thinker.
Are they also tuned to the galactic center? They have a consciousness, because the galactic center is
That's a 28 Sag, yeah.
so they're more tuned to
And it's interesting because all of these souls, and at least the majority, in prior life, would have had a dominant amount of lifetimes in nomadic cultures.
You know what?
Nomadic. Relative to nature.
They're very bright eyes.
Really bright. Now, but look at God's plan. When these people are adults,
Natural.
in terms of this issue of nature and what's going on our planet. And here comes this whole group who've had a series of many lives in nomadic culture, honoring nature. Do you see this plan?
And they're so smart. I mean, I don't have children of my own, but my friend has a 2-year-old, and she is so articulate. Even though I don't understand her language, but she's so articulate, and it's almost like she's a child, but yet she's
Also an adult.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess adult would be the way to say that, so it seems, I don't know, adult, but...
Well, it's like I have a 2.5-year-old with Pluto and Sag, and she's fully aware that she's a baby.
Yeah, exactly.
And enjoying the fact that she's a baby.
Exactly.
When she was 9 months old, because we bought these little poo videotapes, at 9 months she already learned how to perfectly work the VCR. to the point of being able to rewind her forward to a part she wanted to watch. At 9 months. I'm going...
They're very attracted to the Uranus and to computers, to all these...
Yeah.
Very attracted. I mean, it's like they were born with that knowledge, you know.
Exactly.
I have a nephew, he's very curious about the moon and the sun and the stars.
Mm-hmm. Well, she walks outside all the time. Papa stars, always pointing.
Yeah.
He said the sky, outside has little light, medium light, and big light. Big light, the house, medium, you know, what are the little stars in the sky?
I was amazed by, I have a niece that's the same age as Cheyenne, and she can pick out her own homeopathic remedies. Like she just feels it and she goes, this one, Mama. And then Mama's like, oh my God, do I do this? Reads the information. It's right on.
That's the intuitive faculty.
So it's probably going to be the saviors. They're probably going to be the saviors if they're on time.
A bunch of them are. And it's going to take a bunch of them to do it. That's why about 30% are at this level of evolution. Well, what else can we say in this symbolism? There's certainly more. Let's make this question. What would be the difference between a female orientation to these symbols versus male? That's a good way to look at it.
Well, suppression, I would say, as far as a male person in this society and context in which he lives, is the obvious emotional paradox that we are taught as, men here in our culture to suppress and, bottle down maybe the emotional issue of the relationships in general, where it can now be distorted later in adult life. Could that be a possibility or an application as far as that emotional paradox if a guy is not in touch with, individuated state, kind of. But that's just something that came to my head as far as difference.
In the male context, because of the nature of current cultural conditioning, because of that context, he would expect a woman who is in partnership to him to service him, like planets around the sun. There'd be a fundamental inequality, and an implied feeling threatened by a partner who would want her own independence. What you'd have in the beginning is somebody, because he would naturally attract a partner that would want her own independence. So you can imagine the initial dialogue, because his motive is to get her. So the initial dialogue would be, yes, I will give you what you want, and yes, your ideas are here are fine, and I'll help you there, and da-da-da-da. Once he secured her through the vehicle of marriage, then it sets in motion the other extreme. Now I'm going to try to unconsciously limit you, because I'm feeling threatened by your independence. We see shifting to male relative to cultural context.
I don't know, this is almost nothing to do with looking at the symbols. It's almost like a sense of satisfaction, pleasing the person.
Yep.
Okay, with a female, would it be then that she would offer all the service and the catering to and all the...
Out of cultural context, you'd be fighting for equality. Out of cultural context.
In order to catch or to attract a male, would she lure in the opposite way, in the sense of lure to be the moon to his sun, and then once they were married? I'm just thinking of the opposite dynamics in the cultural context. That she would be the female that would be the moon to his sun.
I don't know what you mean by that.
In other words, to serve him, to go around whatever he wants, and then once they're married, then she would assert her independence.
No.
She would immediately saying, hey, let's get together, let's be friends, no ties, no hooks, that type of thing. And that lures him in. Because it's like, hey, here's somebody where I can be free and independent. And so that's attracted to him because of his own inner needs and projections. So it's kind of like both people can be playing this game. And then...
But remember the underlying difference. She'd be fighting for equality based on cultural context / woman versus the man. The rest of what you said is accurate. And another thing you have to always, I don't care if it's male or female, in whatever culture, first house Pluto people are going to experience instinctual attractions to others throughout their life. even in the context of an existing relationship. And you have to talk to the client about such things and what their intentions are when such things happen. Because it can be a major psychological conflict for many of these people, even when they're with a really quality partner. And then all of a sudden you have these psychological, emotional crises. What am I going to do? I feel this really Pluto intense attraction. There's my partner. What am I going to do? It's a typical issue.
If it was that male that we were talking about, would it be like he would get his primary partner and take her and put her in place, and then feel free to have an affair?
Absolutely. All this serving to re-glorify a stupid ego.
Well, that's exactly the case as far as when I was married and then had an affair because of an attraction. And then after the affair, felt so much guilt that I felt like I ruined everything and had to get out.
And what signs you're in Virgo? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, that was my reasoning of, and it was almost like Mike did never want to let go. He's a never give up. He's a Virgo, never give up, never give. And I said, do you want a wife that cheats on you? Masochist that he is. And he's like, well, no. I said, well, let go. I'm thinking that this is what I had to do. In retrospect, it was, obviously, but now it's obviously totally related.
What do you think if we imagine ourselves right now in the counseling situation, we have client X in front of us, this is now the apparent issue. What words of counsel do you have to such a person?
Let's be honest.
Relative to the conflict, do I make the choice to go for the affair, or do I honor my partner, or what am I going to do? How are you going to be talking to the person?
That's the square of Capricorn.
Honesty is the most important in this scenario, isn't it? I mean, as far as to be honest with your partner is to, I've got this attraction on, and I need to tell you about it and work through it, and whatever the case may be, but know that the partner has to have that support from the partner in order to initiate whatever it is that this direction is taking.
Right.
It doesn't have to be honesty handled in a certain way,
With tact.
Yes, I was saying diplomacy. Believe it, you can't just do a Sagittarius thing.
Yeah, guess what?
I'm a Sagittarius. That was my own problem. I can be very diplomatic if I say, which is on first.
Right.
But I think when the Pluto is in Libra, the reason for wanting to have an affair would be because of a sense of inequality in the relationship. And maybe that's what they would need to talk about.
It can be a motive for sure, but the underlying issue is that this is a brand new evolutionary cycle. And therefore they're going to be learning things from new people relative to that new cycle. That's the causative factor in the attractions. And that's why then the Pluto has this intense need to fulfill it. Because sexual experience is just like any other experience. There's knowledge there. That's the underlying reason.
You also have, like, the Pluto in the first, this also person, and this would be a really secure kind of relationship and a unique one. To have a kind of partner who's their first house, like primary partner, and let them go off and do things.
That would require a fundamentally and really secure partner, huh?
I've heard of one couple in my life.
There's just a bunch of them running around, yeah, sure.
I've been thinking that this person, he also needs to learn the right use of sexuality. And the reason I get that is, here you have Pluto in a Venus-ruled sign in the Mars house. So this Pluto is coming through this dense, egocentric need, not need, but desire of Mars, the Mars house. And the Venus rule is, what do I need? And it's in Libra, it's like, what do I need from them? And so that Mars energy, or it's not a Mars energy, that Pluto energy coming from a Mars house in a Libra ruled sign, I see it, this person can manipulate. It can manipulate your sexuality to get what it needs. And the moment that it feels that internal need has been provided by the partner, Libra, and that partner is victory.
Right.
And that there's something else they feel they need, and it would be an instinctual need. And so they would feel that, and because it feels like an instinctual need, they can justify manipulating to get it without actually even thinking of it as manipulation. It's like, it's like the puppy that wants the ball. I mean, it's like, it's right on it.
That's good.
That's just exactly right, Dave. Okay, smokers, let's have our smoke break. Another area.
The nodes.
The nodes. Hey, David, when you asked about the nodes, what is it that you'd like to know?
About the nodes?
The nodes, and find the nodes. What would you want to know about it?
Oh, I'd like examples of working with it. You know, how to use that, you know, say for example, Pluto is conjunct the south node, or there's a planet conjunct with the south node, or how do you integrate those south nodes into a good reading? Say, for example, Pluto is conjunct the south node of Venus and Virgo in the third. Just as an example. Say, for example, 03 Virgo.
Any other?
Exactly conjunct. Yeah, maybe Venus is in the 12. Gemini? All in the thought.
Let's do it first by working with the actual archetype itself. And so here we see the natal Venus, this side. We see the south node Venus. We see the resolving Venus. In other words, let's get used to the Trinity first. Now, as in anything, obviously, in evolutionary astrology, we want to determine context first. Then we can interpret rightly what the totality of all this would mean. So let's make I'll show you how wild this shit can be. Let's say, this happens to be a woman. Let's say she's born in Iraq. And let's say consensus. And of course, this had to be this is setting in motion specific conditions, even down to why she has chosen to be reborn into Iraq. So, which is the country of birth. So this is giving us a clue, a tip, right away about the nature of the soul, why it's born into Iraq. And obviously, sickening patriarchal reality. So, we understand the Venuses in this context, because see what you ultimately will do is you also want to locate Jupiter. And by locating the ruler of this natural Venus and Sag sign, that Jupiter means it's also come before. So let's say, now, what kind of context is that? A context.
What is that?
Old Mongolian. Jupiter. Is that English? Good.
Does that mean south node of Venus in the 12th house in Sagittarius?
Yeah.
Okay. we had a problem reading
Now, this is going to correlate with what's happened to her at a Venus level, Venus archetype, prior to the current life. So right away, we want to remember all the archetypes that apply to Venus. The totality of the archetypes. Remembering the inner, outer, Taurus, Libra. Then we integrate that relative to Sagittarius. We integrate that relative to the house that it's in. Pisces. So we have Venus issues, Sagittarius, Pisces. Yes? That's going to be our sequence. And then we are going to condition all of that as a total picture with what you're finding here. Yes? So, let's move our way through this. Let's put together the totality of this archetype first. Let's first remember all the Venus archetypes. What are they?
Relationship to self. Relationship to self. Inner Venus.
Yes?
Relationship to heaven. Value.
Values equal in what?
Equal.
Meaning?
Meaning.
What else?
Survival, self-reliance,
Issues in self-reliance. Okay, what else?
sexual.
Sexual instincts. What else?
Resources, money. Resources and money and all that type of thing.
Entire issues of survival. How to sustain self.
And then the outer Venus, which would be relationship to others, projection,
Expectations.
expectation, codependency, equal relationship.
How about the issue of giving now?
Giving and taking.
The psychology of listening is implied. Hearing.
The paradox of being.
Okay? So we have all these Venus issues now described for Sagittarius. Let's deal with this level. Let's integrate Sagittarius archetype to the Venus archetype.
Religion and everything.
Clearly religion in the consensus, which is re-implied by Iraq. Okay? So now does that then mean that in prior life that some strict or formal religion was a defining principle in the consciousness with respect to value associations, determining how she's inwardly related? Meaning, how this was going to condition the sexual impulse. Yes, no?
Yes.
If in fact, let's just make an assumption for the moment. Let's say in prior life, she also grew up in this region of the world where Islam was already in place. In the context of a woman, what are then the sexual norms, principles, coming out of Islam that define a woman's sexuality with respect to the religion? What are they? Who knows Islam?
She's not allowed to have any kind of sexual relation at all.
That's right. Typically the clitoris being snipped off.
Not exposed. Not exposed physically, or they have to be covered.
Everything's hidden, isn't it? What else?
He has to serve the man.
Total service to the man. But she's not also expected to be 100% faithful.
Right.
To a rigid degree.
Yeah.
To the point of experiencing great punishment if not.
They had something in the New York Times a few weeks ago about the whole thing of this honor killing that's going on, I think, in Iraq and Jordan and everything, literally where once it was even where the woman was raped by a member of her family, but it was her fault because she became pregnant and
because she got
because
pregnant.
of honor, they interviewed her brother who shot her, who killed her. And he said, well, even though it was like, he said it would be known to look at us on the street when we walk by because they know this happened as shame and everything. So even though I loved her, it was my duty to go out and kill her.
Look at the twist.
I was reading this article. I was just so angry. And they keep them in the ones that don't get killed, they keep them in a prison for their own protection because their family members shoot them. And even their sisters would support it.
Well, see it as you know, and you start to pick up the story.
Yeah.
Because we also have the impulse for freedom, don't we?
Well, what I saw in there was that she is distant from her inner relationship herself, the Sagittarius. She wants freedom to be here in herself, but she's also, no?
Because even though she's going to obviously be creating very suffocating, constraining, horrible imprisonment type conditions, through relationship formation, relative to religion, relative to culture, it's going to have the effect of inducing a high degree of inner fantasy life, which is reinforced by the compression of the 8th house, neuropsychological compression. So this is going to induce a high degree of fantasy life. Because within these symbols, despite that overlaying, there's going to be an inner romantic. House on the Venus and Pisces, house and Sag. So it'd be like imagining a romantic novel, so to speak, as a way of compensating Sagittarius / relieving the actual conditions of the life. And based on that, this can then create the attraction process. Okay? Compulsive attraction. For some individual who's going to be some sort of symbol of what's going on in the fantasy life. See how it's following?
Yes.
So we can see basically the scenario that and of course you would try as much as you could to keep the darn thing secret because of the cultural overlay. So, but now a related issue here, how are women taught in such cultures? How are they taught to relate to their own femininity?
It has to be hidden. The femininity has to be hidden.
They are taught that something about femininity, there's something inherently evil. It's a distorted reflection of the Garden of Eden. Which is why the extremity of the all this business. So,
I was just going to say, unless they keep it like a pure vessel for the man.
Whatever that means. So you can see that even in terms of how she's inwardly learned to relate to herself, to the socialized conditioning via the religion relative to culture, she's already been, just by the fact of being a woman, just that fact alone, she's already been made to feel incredibly guilty, horrible about herself. And of course, with Venus in the Sagittarius sign, that creates hot blood. Hot blood. Passion. The need for sexuality. The need for those meaningful exchange. So she's going to feel all this in herself. So then as she evaluates Venus, herself, as compared Venus to the external conditioning, what does this mean about me?
Make you the bad person.
Yes.
Bad woman.
Right? See how it's following now. That of itself can be an unconscious motivation for seeking out the affair. I'm already bad anyway, therefore.
Yeah, exactly.
See how it's going?
It brings down the punishment too.
Yes.
Could this also, that Jupiter in the 8th house also in Leo be seen as like a demon? She's like, I've got this demon, not real literally a demon, but there's a part of me, the sexual part that she feels is bad, that she'd want to separate herself from?
Yes, that's true, but that would be primarily reinforced to the Leonian feedback when somebody found out. And the message she would be receiving is, look how awful you are for being so fucking selfish. You see what I mean? Selfish. And a culture in which is into the absolute sacrifice.
You were mentioning the South Node of Venus in 12th house as applying to her life now. But what would that mean in regards to her life?
That's what we're describing. Because we're going to bring all that up to speed in order to understand Venus and Capricorn. What has come before that has made the determination of this Venus in this sign, in an Aries house. And you overlay Capricorn with Aries, and it's a struggle. It's like you're in a paper bag. So we can start to see some of this past life stuff, yes, that constitutes subconscious memory, which of itself becomes a determinant for creating this Venus. Look what it describes. Now we're putting Venus and Capricorn in an Aries house. Aries wanting freedom. All kinds of freedom, but also sexual freedom. You see it? And yet by having these subconscious memories in past lives, look how much the guilt is going to manifest / come to a head.
Maybe a suicidal signature also? Or is it
Yes. Could be. But more commonly, somebody else taking her life for her.
because it's in the 12th house?
Because Jupiter is in the 8th related to the 12th.
Okay. But also with the North Node in Aquarius in the 2nd, that's like kind of detaching from the life, or...
Yeah, it's one of its functions, to objectify. But its ultimate intention is to liberate from anything that's binding it from discovering, in this case, first house.
But being in Islam and with all the overlay of everything, I mean, that might be the only, in her consciousness, the only way out is to...
Drugs or suicide.
Once a woman has been raped, they become the town prostitute.
They become...
The town prostitute, they have to live in a house outside like an exile. And then that's thrown into, that's all.
Is that how prostitutes typically appear in this kind of culture? Is that...
Yes, they've already experienced adultery, this rape.
Even said that they were raped. I mean, they don't even have to be raped. Somebody wants to get rid of somebody.
Look how perverse this is. I mean, not only does the woman first have to experience the horror of being raped, it's not her fault, and then all of a sudden she's turned into a prostitute.
I saw a sister, she said her sister or something like that, she's just very It's challenging about our judgments in this, you know, I mean, how we, I mean, just to like, okay, this is all progress, I mean, it's,
They all need. There's no victims. So,
Yes, because you said that the 12th house shows for me very strong a lack of freedom and a lack of security. And the Venus in the first house in Capricorn shows the need for freedom and security. So that fits very well together.
What way the North Node of Venus would fit in here?
we're going to get there. See, another way that these symbols, you can also now see these symbols from a prior life point of view. You can look at it and see even being the possibility of being subjected to harem-type life. So harem. It's a group of women who are made into sexual people for a man. A harem.
One man, many women.
His eyes light up now. Right here. See? So you can also see this sort of stuff, especially when you draw on the nomadic aspect of it. See how that works? So this is, that's all this background that comes up to a head now with Venus and Capricorn in the first house. Obviously, in an evolutionary perspective, the woman is trying to establish and start a brand new cycle in terms of Venus archetype. But those archetypes are now coming, yes, in the Aries house, but they're running through this conditioning called Capricorn. So obviously the person is going to come into the life. Here's your current integration point with respect to Venus. So what is now coming to a head, this entire issue called guilt. Relative to what? What has come before. You see my point? Within that, clearly there's going to be a soul born with incredible levels of rage. Based on this fact, rage is the first house, which has been, of course, deeply repressed. Capricorn. Can you imagine the vibrational nature of such a woman in front of you? Be sitting in front of a hand grenade waiting to go off. It is his underlying intent to break free, new cycles. So does that then mean she has to inwardly reflect Capricorn on the very causes of nature's reasons for the guilt and the anger within it? Yes or no? And see, if you actually would see that woman in a counseling scenario, which you wouldn't in Iraq, but you'd want to talk to her about, number one, the fact of guilt, and what you're then telling such people. There are two causes of guilt. There's what's called learned and acquired guilt, based on projection, and then, of course, we can make guilt out of our own actions. You can then see in this case that the majority of the guilt that she has been carrying has been acquired because of the cultural overlay, the religious overlay. You see my point? So right, what you're saying as a counselor and astrologer, look, all this guilt you've got on top of you, you have acquired. You see my point? What your job is in this life is to begin to undo or unlearn this guilt, which then you then tell her through here to simply follow her own instincts, the Venus instincts, wherever they may lead, and at every along the way, confronting the possibility of guilt in each step. And this is where the actual unlearning is occurring, to the actual initiation of an experience or an action, because the guilt will be present. And she then has to talk to herself all the time. I don't need to feel guilty here. I'm affirming me over and over and over, like drumbeat, in order to repattern the brain relative to the Venus issue. In so doing, she will get herself back. You see my point? And in fact, if we could take her out of that fucking culture, which you'd also tell her, you say we could just transport her to America, you'd also then tell her, because of what's happened before, that in your relationship formations, you create a scenario for yourself that it's honoring you at an Aryan level. And then you have that potential partner fit your reality. Not you in prior life always having to fit all these other men's reality. You see the shift there? Do you see how this is now self-empowering? You see the sequence? You see Miss Davis? So this is a brief illustration of how we work with these sort of things. These are the prior chapters in the book. If we don't know those prior chapters, how can we understand this current chapter and the future chapters to come? How could it be? So we have now a total perspective. Yes, no? Now you see also the importance of understanding cultural context. We can change this immediately. We're going to leave it simple.
Read out of these symbols how she acquired that guilt, because the whole setting to me looks more like a learned guilt.
It is learned guilt. That's what you're telling us.
Capricorn is more pointing out the acquired guilt, isn't it?
It's pointing out.
Acquired.
Same thing. Learned and acquired the same
Oh,
thing.
what are the other things to learn here? The two kinds of guilt.
The other is guilt in our own actions.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't Capricorn show guilt based on our own actions?
It can,
Yeah.
yes. It contains both types in the archetype.
Oh, it does?
Yes.
I thought the one type is more like virtue and the other more like...
Just look at your own Venus in your 10th house. Most of your guilt has been acquired. Yep.
Are you still there?
Well, that's really
Yes, I think that's one thing maybe which we might also want to consider in the picture of an Islamic woman, is that they have a very strong bonding with other women.
Yes.
And it might add to the stress if she had to go alone, for instance, from Iraq to the United States in order to get rid of this imprinting. I guess she would need to bring a sister or a friend or a mother or whatever.
That's a good point. No. Now let's leave these same symbols here. I'm going to change it radically. Let's just go with that. American woman, second stage, individuated, no religious conditioning. Same symbols. And let's put it, bring it up to speed now. Then we have a woman coming in the Pluto-Leo generation, which means she would have hit late teens, roughly in the late 60s. So we're going to understand these symbols that way. Now we've got an entirely different context. So let's run with it, see what you see.
Can you just get Pluto in the 8th house, Self-Node in the 12th, you got Venus in the
No, stop. No, these are all the I think some people didn't understand it. They were just doing all the things with Venus. I think some people think it's on a what? Those are all the Venus, the past, the south node of Venus, the south node of Venus, and north node of Venus, and Venus itself.
Now remember, when she would have been somewhere in the middle late teens, that's going to be hippie time here. And psychedelic time, the Beatles, da-da-da-da, and everything was groovy.
Would this be somebody that would indiscriminately take on sexual partners?
Yes.
And with lacking the discrimination would also, anything with psychedelic nature, with love?
Well, let's describe what's come before. What would this mean before?
Perfect sense for that.
Escapism. A lot of escapism.
Fantasy
In past.
They can, depending on other conditions, yes.
I just think of the individuated escape. That's what made me say that.
Okay. Yeah, you're exactly right. Always hanging out on the alienated edge.
Could it be somebody who got his visions out of drugs?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes. Natural ways of living. An interest in natural law. So she got involved with natural law at this level of evolution relative to natural law and the feminine. Remember those two co-equal desires. Primary partner, freedom from wherever. This all perfectly embodied in Venus South Node. Now intensified.
Sexual freedom.
So is this going to be a woman that has just a couple partners? No?
And also the need for the specialness of having the real emphasis of the Jupiter.
This would be a classic signature of the woman wanting some sort of primary partner, and it gives herself the freedom to follow whatever fantasy of it now, which is compulsed, of a compulsive nature. There's hardly be any ability to resist the compulsion. You see it? So are we going to say that there's been some degree relative to cultural distortion, even though she's trying to instinctually respond to natural law? Because of the implied discrimination, is it not possible that she's some sexual problems because of lack of discrimination relative to disease?
Oh, yeah.
You see it? So, because here again you have the same theme relative to state of nomadic ways of living. And to live nomadically is very different than what you guys are doing here. So, you've got the subconscious memory. All this has gone on before. You bring it up into the current life. She grows up at the time, at the hippie time, in which love was the prevailing slogan in labor. What's that?
And got happy.
Huh?
You can also really totally trash yourself.
That's the
I
point.
get total trashing, like, oh wow, this makes me trans out, man, and like wanting to do that compulsion as much as possible, not being discriminated. And all the psychedelics and the drugs, which is heightening the whole effect. I guess you're like being a total burnt out slave.
She's attracted to time.
But I see this kind of like it's not like really opening her legs.
Well, and also with this symbolism, this is, in this context, it could be really ripe for having more than just one sexual partner at a time.
Yeah, she could be one who's like drunk out and there's like a bunch of people in the room.
Yeah, that.
You know what's going on. She's still remaining a very private person. She's not told enough, is she?
It would depend on the specific nature of the situation. If she was in, say, a group scenario in which there's a lot of drugs floating around, she'd be wide open. Yeah, she couldn't hide herself anymore.
But that in the past has created real problems for her when she does let out what she gets the South Node, Venus and Sag, and so one way for me to look at that is with the ruler in the 8th is being judged for being crazy. You know, and as a result, you know, I can see him as this woman being, you know, drawn and quartered or something, you know, because
She would be considered crazy from the point of view of her ideals. She'd be so darn idealistic, and especially in the context of that time. And you start putting dope into it, you can imagine what's coming out of her mouth in terms of ideals and or fantasy, and that's how she'd be considered a bit loose or not all the screws screwed in, but from the point of view of the fantasy relative to ideal. It's not that she's literally crazy.
yeah, but it would seem like with Pluto and Jupiter in the 8th, there's been a lot of loss, abandonment, betrayal. We know that coming in. And then the Jupiter rules that South Node of Venus. It's kind of like...
Got it wrong.
Wrong?
In this case, she's the one doing all the abandoning. Because there were underlying need for freedom. You put this in the context of Leo. It's revolving around her. Her needs.
Is that a distortion of where you were back using sex in a positive way?
All through here. Any of us because it down. But as what would be happening because especially when you put on this mode, Venus.